and thank you for joining us. This is part one of our ELD Summer Academy. This is designed for new teachers and new coordinators or classroom teachers or anyone who's really wanting to learn more about working with English language development. Today's session is going to be kind of the background on rules and regulations that dictate how we serve our students. And tomorrow will be the more fun activities where we're looking at some techniques and things that you can use in the classroom. I keep getting more people joining, so hang on with me. All right, so part one, again, we're going to talk a little bit about the rules and regulations. We have on the DESE webpage Missouri's Commitment to English Learner Success Blueprint, and it has 12 different categories that you see here. Each time I do a presentation, I try to highlight which areas we're going to discuss, and today we're going to look at the middle three, numbers 4, 5, and 6, which is directed at getting educators where they need to be, where they can serve our English learners in a better capacity. So we're going to look at effective, well-prepared, and culturally responsive educators, high standards for English learners, and providing you with some of the resources that you need. So again, as I said, today we're going to work on getting a better understanding of the guidance that prepares educators to meet the needs of their English learners. And hopefully you'll be able to go back and reiterate these in your school district, in your classrooms, and when working with others. There's that link to the presentation again if you need it. And I'll put it here one more time in the chat so that you have the slides. Let's do the next one. So I want to start with this video that I found a couple of years ago. Hopefully you'll be able to hear it all right. Let me check the settings here real quick and make sure we're set with the optimal sound. All right, so just take a quick second. It's a very short video.
Letter to teachers. Dear teachers, recently my daughter started kindergarten. She came in knowing some letters, but that was about it. And now she's putting together entire words. She views language as a playground and reading as a chance to explore another world. I don't completely understand the science of phonics and blending and sight words, but you do. And miraculously, millions of kids learn to read every day. So, thank you. Thank you for loving students who are too scared to go to school, or who feel too shy or alone. Thank you for not believing the lie that there are good kids and bad kids. Thank you for seeing each child as a person and not a number. And for all the small battles you fight against the testing culture. I see your bravery, and I admire it. Look, I've seen the radio interviews and TV segments, social media posts and magazine articles that blame teachers for everything from crime to economic collapse. But every time I walk into school early in the morning, I see teachers tutoring kids. I see teachers staying up late to give feedback on student work. I know that you spend hundreds of your own dollars on classroom supplies. I know that you have wept over the tragic stories of the kids you have grown to love. You are changing lives even when you can't see it. Thank you for finding ways to help kids fall in love with learning. Thank you for inspiring creativity and pushing critical thinking. I often ask people, who is someone who changed your life for the better? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is the teacher. You are making a difference every day. Sincerely, John.
And I start with that because I truly believe that you make a difference, and our English language learners are some of those students who fit into those categories. So thank you for the job you do and for the job you're going to be doing, and just know that you're appreciated. All right, so we're going to start with a few introductions, and this will serve as my check of who's here. So if you will, in the chat, tell me who you are, where you're from, what you do, and if you want, you can include something new and surprising that you recently learned. So I'm going to give you a few minutes or a minute or two to put that in the chat, just so I'll have that information. And it also serves as a way for us to see who's here so that you can make some connections with people you may not already know. So if you will, go ahead and put that in the chat. Please let me know what district you're with as well. Thank you, Jennifer. Welcome, Ashley. Great to see you as always, Daisy. And Dana, welcome. And Jamie. Daisy. Two Daisies again. Welcome, Daisy. Guadalupe, good to see you. Rhonda, thank you for joining us. Chelsea, welcome. Monica, welcome. All right, if you will, please continue. Tara, welcome. Carolyn, continue put those in there again. That will serve as my check-in to see who was here today from my list. So appreciate you. Again, my name is Cammie Goucher. Before taking my position here at DESE, I worked in a school district as EL coordinator instructor for over 20 years. I retired after a little over 30 years of teaching. I started out as a reading specialist. Then I taught 5th grade for a while. And then I fell in love with my English learners and made that my career. And now I work for DESE, and I'm on the curriculum side of instruction for English language learners. So that's who I am. Thank you again for joining me. Thank you for taking the time to introduce yourself in the chat. So we're going to take a little bit of historical perspective on the history behind English language development. And it got its roots in 1964 with the Title VI Civil Rights Act. And it has progressed even with some more recent changes in the last few years. We're going to walk through a few of these and what they mean to us and how they help our English language learners. So the first one is that Title VI of Civil Rights Act happened in 1964. And what it said basically was that you can't discriminate on the grounds of race, color, or national origin. And this significant legal obligation lays the foundation for prohibiting all aspects of discrimination. It's been interpreted to protect English learners, which we used to call limited English proficient students, and it gives them equal access to education. say I have somebody new joining the group. And I'm going to put our link to the slides in one more time. Yeah. All right. So if you're new to English language development, this is going to give you a background as to the rules and regulations that we use for establishing our programs and that we use in our state. If you have been teaching English language learners in the past, this will give you a refresher as to why we do some of the things we do. And it will also give you something to use when you're presenting in your own district. So it's twofold here. John F. Kennedy was instrumental in helping to promote equity in education for all students. And he made this wonderful quote. So simple justice requires that public funds to which all taxpayers of all races, colors, and national origins contribute, not be spent on in any fashion which encourages, entrenches, subsidizes, or results in racial, color, or national origin discrimination. So basically, we all pay taxes, and so everybody should be treated the same. It's a good quote. And the next step in our history of English learners was this Equal Education Opportunities Act, or EEOA as it's called. It was in 1974, and it takes it to a level that specifically focuses on education. So we can't deny equal educational opportunities to students because of their race or sex or national origin. None of that is allowable. So everyone's entitled to an education. Next in 1974 was the Lau versus Nichols court case that probably everyone has heard about. It was from a school district in San Francisco and it had to do with Chinese students. And it's one of the most important legal events for bilingual education. There were around 1,800 Chinese students in the schools, and they felt that they were being discriminated against because all of the lessons were presented in English. And these students didn't speak English, so they couldn't understand the lessons, and they weren't getting any special assistance to help them with understanding. More people joining in just a second. So the school district said, it's not our fault that they don't speak English. We're being fair and just because we provide the same instruction to all students. But the families and the students didn't feel that that was accurate, and they took it to court. The lower courts in the state agreed with the school district and said they were doing their part because they were giving everyone the same education opportunity. So they took it to the next level, and they took it to the Supreme Court. And in the Supreme Court, it was ruled unanimously that they were not treating the students fairly, and they were not giving them an equitable access to education. And there's a great quote from one of the Supreme Court judges, Justice William O. Douglas, and I have it on the next screen. He said, "There is no equality of treatment merely by providing students with the same facilities, textbooks, teachers, and curriculum. For students who do not understand English are effectively foreclosed from any meaningful education." So what they said, they had to do some sort of accommodation for the students. The bottom line was they must provide English learners with meaningful access to educational content and programs in a language that they could understand. And a lot of times this is met through ESL or bilingual programs. And another case that we're going to talk about in a moment, the Castaneda and Pickard in 1981 made this even more and brought about the three-pronged test that we're going to talk about. So as I said, Castaneda versus Pickard really escalated the concept of not giving them or going beyond just giving everyone the same thing, and really picking out what is necessary. So in this case, it was in the United States District Court in Texas. There was a parent, Roy Castaneda. He was the father of 2 Mexican-American children, and he felt that his children were being discriminated against because of their ethnicity. He didn't feel like they were getting the kind of education that he felt they needed. They were segregated from the other students and maybe not given the same assignments or the same opportunities. And so he took them to court over it and ended up going again, appealing to the United States Court of Appeals. And as a result, the court decided on what we now call the Castaneda, 3-pronged Castaneda approach. And what that says is that, I think it's on the next one. Let's look at this first. It addresses with components in the compliance. It says teachers have to be adequately trained and be evaluated by someone familiar with the methods being assessed. That criteria should be based on objective standards. Schools cannot have policies of no double services, where they like refuse them from being in enrichment or special education, and whatever they need. And again, they can't be excluded from those special programs. And as I said, this led to the adoption of the 3 prongs of the Castaneda versus Pickard court case. And those 3 prongs, they said that the bilingual education program must be based on sound educational theory. It must be implemented effectively with resources for personnel, instructional materials, and space. So you can't put them in a closet. And then after a trial period, the program must be proven effective in overcoming language barriers. So you don't just adopt a program and that's what you do forever. You're supposed to keep ongoingly looking at your program, seeing if it's effective, and if it's not effective, you make changes. And that wasn't being done. So following this, we went to No Child Left Behind in 2001, and now we have ESSA, or ESEA, that was started in 2015. And there are 5 purposes to our current legal obligations. The first one is that we develop high levels of academic achievement in English for all students, that they achieve in academic subjects so that they can meet the standards necessary for our state assessments, that we establish, implement, and sustain those effective programs that we talked about in the Castaneda, that we provide effective instructional programs that are designed to prepare English learners to be successful in classrooms. And the 5th one, that we promote parent, family, and community participation in our English language development programs. So those are what our current regulations say that we are required to do. The U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights and the Department of Justice both share enforcement authority on these issues. So a lot of times if they get calls at OCR or DOJ will go out to districts to investigate. Because of all of these legal documents, they issued a joint guidance in 2015 that and tells districts what they're expected to do. This guidance applies to state agencies, local agencies, and any school district that receives any kind of federal funding, not just Title III funding, but any kind of federal funding. And they identified 10 common civil rights issues for English learners. So over the years, they've collected and recorded all of the cases that they've gone out and investigated, and they have found 10 common issues that they have to consistently address. So at the state level, when we talk about rules and regulations, they're based on these documents. if we make a rule or regulation at the state level, it has to go through legislature and be approved. And so what we do as a state is we look to the federal guidance for all of our rules and regulations. And then as a state, we make recommendations based on those rules and regulations. So we don't really set our own different guidance. We rely on the federal guidance as our main rule process. So these are the 10 common civil rights issues for English learners that they observed and investigated over the past couple of decades. So the first is about how students are identified or that they aren't being identified. The second one is that they have a program that provides them assistance. The third, that they have the appropriate staff to support English language development. The fourth, that they have opportunities for meaningful participation in everything that goes on in the school, curricular and extracurricular. The fifth is that we do not segregate the English language learners. The sixth is that we make accommodations for English learners with disabilities. And the seventh is that we have something in place for those who opt out of having assistance programs, because parents have the right to say, I don't want my student to participate in that type of program. The eighth is that we monitor and evaluate on an ongoing basis to see what the proficiency level and whether they're making progress in their program that we're using. The ninth is the effectiveness of your program, that ongoing evaluation of how you're doing. Do we need to make changes? And if so, have a process to make those changes. And the last one is communication with parents. So those are the 10 things that were consistently occurring that they were having to investigate. And out of that, they developed the EL toolkit, which is what we mainly use in Missouri as our guidance and for making recommendations. So we're going to walk through the EL toolkit together. And again, these are the 10 chapters of the EL toolkit, and you'll see they go right along with those 10 most frequent cases that they have had through their system that they've had to go and investigate. All right, so the first chapter is that identifying all English language learners. And what this part of the document says is that they have to identify in a timely manner those students who are needing assistance, that you have to use some sort of home language survey for identifying, and that it has to be administered effectively to ensure accurate results. And so in Missouri, we have what we call our language use survey. And one thing that we make sure that everyone knows is that you have to have posted somewhere that if parents need translation, that you will provide it free of charge for them. And a lot of parents will bring someone with them to help them when they enroll their child, then that's fine. But you have to let them know that you will offer translation if they need it. Now, the actual language use survey, it starts with 3 questions that are required questions. So we have to have the top 3 questions, no matter what state you're in. The first one is, what was your child's first language? The second one, what language does your child speak at home and with other people? And the third, what language does your child hear at home and understand? So they have those 3 questions. And if they answer any of those 3, then you go on and complete the rest of our language use survey. If they answer another language other than English on any of those first 3, that student is potentially an English language learner. And I'll go into why we say potentially here. When you have a student that has answered something other than English on the language use survey, then that is referred to the ELD teacher or whoever helps with the screening. And it's important that you know that this is just a tool for identification. This is not the identifier. So having a positive response on the language use survey does not mean they're an ESL student. That's just the first step. It's really important that you have an interview with parents to find out if there's any other information that might explain why they answered the way they did. For example, they might say they might have grandma that lives in their house for a short time and she only speaks Spanish, so the child is exposed but doesn't speak that language. So that student, because they don't have that as their primary language and they don't interact on a regular basis, it doesn't impact their learning. That student would not be considered an English language learner because it doesn't influence their language. It's short term and it's not a deep impactful, something that deeply impacts their language. And sometimes the reverse happens, like we'll have parents that took Spanish in high school and maybe studied abroad and speak the language fluently, but their children have never been exposed. And so the student wouldn't necessarily be impacted by the parent's ability to speak another language. And then there's also the case where parents are learning English and maybe they don't speak English very well, but they only speak English with their children. So the English that they are using is not fluent English. So the student would not be considered proficient in English because the person that they learned English from was not proficient in English. And a lot of times they list English as the language, and that may be the only language the student knows. They may not know their parents' home language, but the English that they're learning is not a proficient English. So they would qualify in that case as well. So we can't always look at the language use survey and make that judgment. We have to talk to parents and look at other information. So if the student answers one of those first three questions and completes the rest of the language use survey, then the ESL teacher will screen the student with the WIDA screener. We do have a brand new kindergarten WIDA screener that has to be used starting this year. We no longer have the WAPT, if you're familiar with that. That is now been retired. So we have a kindergarten screener and then a 1 through 12 screener. And if the student qualifies based on the screener, then the ESL teacher would notify classroom teachers and parents as is required by the law. They add the student to their database and they develop an individual academic plan of support for that student. And then they change their status in their core data to English learner. If a student does not qualify, the ESL teacher should still notify the classroom teacher that, hey, I've screened this student. They didn't qualify for services, just so that they know that you have looked at that student, but also give them the information that, if they're struggling in class, let me know, and I'll go back and look at them again, because sometimes things arise later on. All right. So again, there are our first three questions. If any of those three questions indicated a language other than English, then you'd continue on with the rest of the questions. And it gets a little more into their language background. So it gives you some idea of what education they've had to this point, what training with English, if any, and then what schooling they've had, to give you a better idea of where the students are. And then on the language use survey that I have this preferred language for communication with parents. So what language would they like to be contacted by phone, and what language in written contact? Or sometimes that's helpful if they're not literate in their own language and aren't able to read, and that gives you that idea as well. All right. So that takes care of identifying our students. Next thing that we need to look at are the tools and resources for our language assistance program. So again, this goes back to Castaneda. The EL services and programs must be based on educationally sound theory and effective practice. They must be designed to enable English learners to participate in the standard classroom within a reasonable length of time. They must offer services and programs until they are proficient in English and can participate meaningfully in the educational program. And that's one thing that we've had to address quite frequently in the past few years. For some reason, we have a lot of districts who think when they get to a level 3, we can stop providing them services and push them into the regular classroom and just maybe visit with a classroom teacher. This federal regulation shows that we need to keep working with those students until they are proficient and can participate completely in the EL program without support. So if you're one of those districts that they say we need to stop at a 2.5 or 3.0 and put them back in a classroom and have minimal contact with them, this gives you a grounds to rebut that and say, no, we need to provide services. And a lot of times when they get to a 3.0 or above, their needs change. They have missed things from when they were starting out in the program that we need to catch them up on. Even though they're kind of gaining the language, they still have things they've missed out on that we need to catch them up with. And then the last part of this one is talking about students with disabilities that we need to accommodate their needs as well. They're intended to help schools, the local education agency, our state, to make sure that we provide the students with the assistance that they need. These tools give examples. So they provide tools in here that give examples on how we can meet the needs of our students. So there are 4 tools in section 2. The first one is guiding questions. So it gives you a list of questions that you can kind of do a self-assessment in your district to see how well you're serving your EL population. It gives a checklist for long-term English learners to help you figure out why you have long-term English learners and what you can do to help with that. And then some research-based considerations for services and programs, just some different ideas on how you can work with the students. And then a learner program chart that gives an overview of some of the different programs that are available and kind of describes them. So in Missouri, we have this set, I think there are 10 programs that we identify in core data. The first one is sheltered instruction, then as a resource classroom where you just pull them from regular instruction for supplemental instruction. You could have a newcomer center, you could do co-teaching, you could have a coaching model. You can have ELD as a content course, that's usually in secondary. Structured English immersion, that's where they're in a regular classroom. Content-based instruction, pull-out ESL, and then bilingual instruction. So those are the models that we identify within our core data. And this gives you a definition of each one if you want to go back and read through that. All right, so chapter 3 moves on to talk about resources for staffing and supporting your program. The first one says that they must provide personnel necessary to effectively implement their EL programs. So the federal government is stating here that you have to have someone in your local education agency that knows how to work with English language learners. They have to have necessary personnel that includes teachers who are qualified to provide EL services, core content teachers who are qualified in the field to train and support English learners, and trained administrators who know how to evaluate those teachers. So it's not just important that your teachers get trained, but your administrators need to also understand the program so that they can evaluate those teachers. Local education agencies are also required to provide professional development and follow-up training for teachers, administrators, that's both EL teachers and classroom teachers, about how to implement an EL program effectively. The local education agencies also have to ensure that administrators who evaluate the EL staff are adequately trained so that they can see if the teachers are being effective, and if not, what needs to be done to have a successful program. And they also have to ensure that qualified teachers and administrators are the state level. We look at core data when it comes in. We look at the number of teachers who are qualified in each district. So we kind of monitor whether or not districts have an ESL teacher on staff, or if they have someone who runs an EL program if you have a certain number of students. The federal government says even if you have one English learner, you have to make sure that you are meeting their needs. So something to keep in mind when you're looking at your program. So some key points here are that you are obligated to provide the resources necessary to implement your EL program, and that they include adequate and appropriate materials for the ESL program. One of the things about qualified teachers, you have to ask, do all EL programs, core content, and special education teachers who work with English learners have the appropriate training to teach English learners? If not, is someone working on that? At the state level, we provide some guidance and we monitor whether or not you have qualified teachers. And so we're also working with all of the content areas to make sure that all content areas have some sort of training. We're looking at our certification process and hoping to make some changes to enable more training ahead of time for new teachers in the teacher development programs, so that they're better trained to work with English learners. Also, professional development, again, it has to be ongoing. And when I was in a district at the beginning of the school year, I always provided an EL training to new teachers, so that they knew how we worked with English learners in our district, what the process for identification, how they found the student's proficiency level. So that's a good thing to start out new teachers with. I also had set in on department meetings or grade level meetings, and just on a rotating basis, and worked with those teachers so that they knew if they had any questions, they could easily come to me and ask those. And I also was on the rotation for our faculty meetings, and would provide professional development on an ongoing basis throughout the year as part of our faculty meetings. So everyone who works with English learners, as I said, should receive professional development, should be able to go to conferences that deal with English learners, so that they have the necessary skills to work with them. We also need to make sure that you have an adequate number of qualified staff. Our guidance in the past specifically spelled out that the ratio of student to teacher should match the classroom. That's still what we're going with, and we're still working on getting that printed in the new MSIP. But that is the general guideline, that your student to teacher ratio for ELs should match the student to teacher ratio for the regular content classroom. Again, this talks about both your EL teacher and your paraprofessionals should be adequately trained. So your paraprofessionals should also be getting some professional development, and program evaluations need to be viewed by those who are sufficiently trained to evaluate EL teachers and the program. So your principals and administrative staff also need some training. And then adequate resources. Do they have sufficient and appropriate materials for the proficiency levels? for all grade levels, for each EL program, whether it be pull out, push in, a resource room. Have you provided the materials needed, which includes a space to hold those classes? And also, do they provide challenging academic content? We don't water things down. We want the students to continue learning so that they can try to keep up with the content level standards of the classroom while they're learning English. And this portion of the toolkit also has some tools. The first tool talks about professional development for teaching English learners. The next tool talks about professional development for general ed teachers. The next one is how to meet the needs of English learners. It gives you some skills for teachers of English learners. And then part 4, the tool 4, is a framework for supporting classroom teachers. So things you can do to help within the classroom. I will say that our new WIDA standards, the way that they're set up, leads right into this and helps work with classroom teachers to look at the language needs of the students. So I'm really pleased with those. And they help to support this tool number 4 as well. Paperwork is an important part of ELD, and that really is one of the things that probably is the most time consuming at the beginning of the year and maybe at the end of the year as well. It's an ongoing thing that you have to keep your paperwork up to date. Your database of where your students are, what proficiency level are necessary for funding. And it's also a requirement of the Office of Civil Rights to be in compliance. If you have students who are being referred for special ed or special programs, it's really important to have that information available to you so that you don't have to go out and try to create something. So if you're keeping it on an ongoing basis and have it available, it just helps you out. So within each student's portfolio, you should have a copy of their access scores, their screener score, notes from teachers and parents, their individual academic plan, a copy of their parent notification. You have documentation and portfolio evidence of their progress. With my older students especially, we created goal sheets that we put in there, and I went over those on an ongoing basis with the students, and we checked off what they were accomplishing as the year goes along. You could share this with classroom teachers where they could check off things as they're progressing through as well. The most recommended level to start this at is a proficiency level of 3.5. In my district, we started with their portfolio when they enrolled in the school district. So we had it from when they started until when they exited. You also would put in an exit letter after they have achieved a 4.7 or above, so that you have that in their file, and that you know if you leave the district or someone new is working with the student, they'll know that they've achieved that 4.7 and that you have contacted and notified parents. Also, if the student waived or opted out of services, you need a letter stating that you've contacted the parents and worked with them and that they have opted out of services. And that should be in their folder as well, just to protect you. And so that for future teachers, EL teachers, if they look in the student's folder, they'll see that the parent refused services, and they can either contact them again and see if they've changed their mind, or they'll know that they've been screened and that they've refused services. I've also included here a link to a data file that I created for organizing all of my information when I was in the district that you can look at if you're interested. It was just through Google, a way to organize all of my information so that you have that if you're interested in using something similar. In the permanent files, you also should be collecting the annual individual academic plan, and then make any updates when there are changes in the student status. You should have a copy of their screener and their annual access scores. When they exit, a copy of their exit letter. And then again, if they've waived service or refused services, a letter that states that as well should be in their perm record. All right, so chapter 4 is talking about that equal access to curricular and extracurricular programs. So this one, there are a lot of different avenues that this addresses. One could be talking about like your student rules and regulations for your district, making sure that they're translated. So if there's a rule that the student's breaking, they know that that was a rule, because it would be unfair to punish them if they had no access to what the rules were. So state and local agencies have to design and implement services that enable them to attain English and participate within a reasonable work length of time. They have to provide opportunities for participation in curricular, co-curricular, extracurricular programs and activities. The state works to ensure that schools and LEAs use appropriate, reliable, and valid evaluations and testing to measure the acquisition of language. So LEAs may not exclude English learners from GATE programs, those gifted programs or other specialized programs, APs, honors, IBs, any of those. They must also ensure that evaluation and testing for those programs do not screen out ELs because of their proficiency levels. So they have to make accommodations that allow them access to those programs. And we monitor to make sure that former ELs are also referred for and participate in those programs so that they're not left out because they used to be an English language learner. So there are 4 tools for this one as well. The first one is data collection. It gives you some ideas on how to assess and use data. The second one are the 6 principles of teaching English learners that helps you to work through the aligning to your standards. The third tool is college and career readiness. It gives you ideas on how to get students ready for college. And the fourth one is talking about working with gifted learners. Another thing that I wanted to kind of point out here that you might consider, especially if you're working with high school students, is when you're having special programs in your school district, and like in our district, the seniors got to paint the hill, and then they have prom and all of those things. If you're not translating those emails and flyers and things for your students, they may be missing out on those activities, and that falls in this area as well. So if you're not providing them access, then they're not going to understand what's going on. They may not have participated in any activities like that before, and they wouldn't know how to prepare and what's happening. So you also have to meet their needs in that respect as well. All right, chapter 5 are tools and resources for creating an inclusive environment, and that deals with the unnecessary segregation. So local education agencies cannot segregate English learners to the extent necessary to reach state goals. They should not keep ELs segregated and segregated EL populations for English only classes for longer periods than are necessary to gain proficiency. And while they can receive intensive English language instruction or bilingual services in separate classes, it wouldn't be justifiable to segregate them for like the whole day. You have to include them in PE and art and music where they're integrated, lunchtime, recess, all of those activities should be integrated with the mainstream population. And there are 3 tools that go with this. There's a diversity self-assessment tool, resources for addressing bullying and harassment that might be addressed at English learners, and then a sample self-monitoring aid to help you see if the extent to which you're segregating your students and address some issues that you might have in that area. This one comes into context a lot with school districts who try to bus students all to one location or only have ESL services at one school and not others. So those are some of the things that OCR gets phone calls on in this regard. So you might want to look at your program and how you're approaching that and making sure that you're not segregating students in any way so that they don't have access to the same thing as all other students. They don't have that integration with English speaking peers, which helps them acquire English more quickly. So those are some of the things to look for in that area. Chapter 6 are the tools and resources for addressing English learners with disabilities. So your local education agency has to identify, locate, and evaluate ELs that may need special services in a timely manner. For some reason, there was this miscommunication that you had to wait at least a year or you have to wait 2 years. That is not true. As soon as you have the idea that the student might have a learning disability that isn't related to learning a language, that's when you should start working on looking at the needs of the students and doing some screening or some assessment. You have to consider the proficiency of ELs with disabilities to determine assessments and evaluation materials. So any assessments you need to make, you have the alternative assessments available for English learners as well. You have the ability to give some assessments in the student's native language unless it's clearly not feasible to do so. You cannot identify or determine that English learners are students with disabilities because of their limited English proficiency. Being limited English does not make them a special ed student. It's not a disability. You have to provide English learners with disabilities both the language assistance and the disability-related services they need. So we can't preclude one from the other. You have to provide both of them. They're entitled to both. So there are 5 tools that go with this chapter. The first one is referral, identification, assessment, and delivery of services for students with disabilities. And then looking at the difference between language differences and disabilities on learning behaviors. So it gives you kind of a checklist of what to look for to help you determine if it's a language difference or if it's a disability. Developing an IEP for an English learner with a disability. They give you a little checklist for that. How to use data from OCR and civil rights collection to help you to deal with issues relating to English learners with disabilities. And then selecting appropriate accommodations for ELs with disabilities, some do's and don'ts. So there are those 5 tools in that area. Chapter 7 talks specifically about those parents who opt out of EL services. And it points out that they do have the right to opt out of a particular EL service. This has to be a voluntary decision based on fully understanding the student's rights and the kinds of services that you have for the student and the benefits that they'll get for those services. If they still decide to opt out, that child still retains his or her status as an English learner, and the local education agency has to continue to monitor the student's proficiency level and their progress and provide some sort of assistance to them. If they don't demonstrate the growth, then you meet with the parents again and say, hey, your kid's not making any progress. They really would benefit from being in an ESL program, and talk to them again about the services that are available based on that data and that information. So again, there are 3 tools that go with this. There's a statutory requirement. That parent notification letter tells them that their student has the right, and it has to say that they have the right to opt out of programs or particular services. Then the second tool is a sample opt-out notification, and then a sample opt-out bringing the child back in if they aren't making progress. So it gives you some examples of letters or documents that you can use with parents. All right. The 8th chapter is resources for monitoring and exiting your English learners from programs and services. So the key points here that say that you have to monitor the progress of all English learners as they're achieving proficiency. You have to have a rigorous monitoring system that includes benchmarks for expected growth and steps that you take if they're not making progress. And then we also monitor to make sure that you're providing access to grade level core content and that you're working on any problems. If your students aren't making progress, what are you doing about it? So those are things that we look at the state level. There are 4 tools that go with this part of the toolkit. First one is monitoring progress. So it gives you a sample monitoring form that you can use. The second one is monitoring progress in core content areas. And again, it gives you an example form that you can use to track progress in content area classrooms. There are some digital monitoring tools that are available online that it gives you access to, and some resources for planning and self-assessments of your school district. These all come from the Office of Civil Rights. So those are there for you. And then chapter 9, there are some tools and resources for evaluating the effectiveness of your district's EL program. So annually, you should look at your program and see if you are meeting the needs of your students. So you're looking to see if you have successful programs that allow your English learners to obtain both English proficiency and standards in the classroom within a reasonable period of time. You're collecting your data and monitoring and comparing one year to the next, looking at progress over time, looking at the effectiveness of certain programs. And it's not just limited to collecting data for reporting purposes, it's looking at the data to inform decisions on the program and how you work with your students. And then we look at to see, are they progressing in both proficiency and growth over time. And those are the things that we report and we do your annual reports on. And if you aren't making that progress, then we look at maybe you need to modify your program. All right, they offer 4 tools for this. The first tool is evaluating your program and services. It gives you some questions for program evaluation that you can do a self-assessment. Improving the state system to support all students. It gives you information for reform, including those focused on English learners. So it's just an overview. Tool 3 is improving your local system. So it gives you some ideas on how you can strengthen your local education program for English learners. And then improving school-based systems for English learners gives you information to help schools strengthen their EL programs at the school level. So school level, local level, state level, and then topics and questions. So this is a very helpful chapter. And this is one thing that I want to make sure to emphasize, that if your program isn't working, you have to look at it. You have to make adjustments, and don't keep hanging on to the doorknob. You got to let go of the doorknob and open the door to change. And this is a good time to do some changing. If you notice things aren't working, if your students haven't been making progress, let go of that doorknob, open the door, and look at something new. That brings us to chapter 10. And it's talking about communication with parents. Both the state and local agencies have obligation to communicate with parents in a language that they can understand. And they have to process they have to have a process to identify your parents that don't speak English that need an interpreter. Like I said, in our language use survey, we included that question that says, how would you like to be contacted? In what language would you like to be contacted, by phone or in writing? So something like that, so you know the needs of your parents. And you have to have appropriate and competent translators or interpreters that help with the needs of translating and interpreting for your district. So have a list of interpreters and translators that you can go to within your district, or a service that you can contact. And then there are 4 tools for this one. The first one is talking about establishing a school family partnership. It gives you a framework for setting something up in your district, and then how to tap into the strengths of families and communities. It gives you some ideas for engaging your community. And then tool 3, the school leader and engaging families of English learners, gives you 20 strategies to consider. And then interpretation and translation resources, some places, some organizations that you can utilize for services if you need them. So some background resources. There's a fact sheet on the responsibility of school districts. There's a fact sheet on answering common questions about the rights of limited English proficient parents and guardians. Some translations into multiple languages. These are all available on the Department of Ed's resource page with this link here. There's also a companion toolkit for newcomers that's available here. They are working to revise that. They've been working on it for over a year now, and they told us at our most recent meeting that that's almost finished and ready to go out. And then we have a DESE ELD webpage with all sorts of resources tabbed for you to find more information on state information. As far as professional development within our state, there you can sign up for workshops on our DESE calendar, which is on this link here. Scroll down to the bottom of the page and you'll see a calendar that has links on certain dates. So you'll have to look at the calendar and look for those dates. We also have our ELD check-in that will continue next year. It's on the 4th Monday of each month at 3:45. And I will post, it's on the web page, on the DESE web page. I will post the link to that there. And it's also on that calendar, that's the DESE calendar above. We don't have meetings in December or July because of holiday season. We also have every year a federal programs conference. This year it will be the 14th and 15th of November. It's at Tantera, and we will have special sections for English language development. This year we're going back to our WIDA self-paced e-learning, and this is available to any teacher in the state of Missouri. Doesn't have to be EL only. Any classroom teacher, any administrator, pretty much anyone that wants to learn more about English language learners who is an educator. You have to have access to the WIDA secure portal, and you can get that through me or by contacting WIDA services, and just let them know that you want to take part in the self-paced learning, and they give you a special login that lets you only see that part. So that's available. And I also created this Wakelet resource for new ELD coordinators and teachers that goes through a lot of what we talked about and gives you access to all of the Missouri communications and forums and tools that we use in Missouri, and gives you a few more ideas. So if you're new, there's that link for you as well. Something we have that's unique to Missouri, we have 5 regional instructional specialists So those are listed here, and they're all located at your RPDC. Guadalupe is in Kansas City. Cynthia is in Columbia. Rob is at Ed Plus in St. Louis. Rhonda's in Springfield, and Julie's in the Cape Girardeau area. And this map kind of tells you what region. You can contact your regional RPDC. If you want to get more information from them, they're happy to come to your district and work with you and your schools. And if you just have general questions, they're great to call and get some more information. You can find links to their email and phone number on that DESE webpage that I shared earlier. And then that brings us to any questions. And I'm going to put this link to the evaluation. So that was a lot of information, waterfall, I'm sure. I'm going to stop sharing now and just give you a chance to ask any questions that those slides might have brought up for you.
Cami, I have a question.
Yes, Daisy.
So we now have staff in every one of our buildings, but our K1 building has a para assigned to it, but no full-time EL teacher. So according to the supervision of a para, they can't do pull out into their own classroom because they're considered a para. So how much supervision from an EL teacher would you suggest? Would a monthly meeting to go over progress and instructional strategies work? Do those kids still need an EL teacher to go there every once in a while?
Yes. Okay. That's a very good question. And I get that question quite frequently. One thing that I always bring up is they are a para. They don't get paid a teacher's salary. So we really shouldn't expect them to do everything a teacher is expected to do. And a lot of times districts will opt for a para instead of a teacher, which is kind of unfair. They have to have someone that helps them prepare the lessons, helps them look at the proficiency levels and what best meets the needs. That's again why I say paras also need training and professional development. They are to be under the direct supervision of a teacher, but there are many districts in which they do pull out services, and the para takes them out into the hallway into a special area to work with them. And that's kind of frowned upon, but it is, for short term, it is allowable, but as a long-term solution, that is not something that OCR recommends. As far as the supervision, as long as they're under the direct supervision of a teacher who knows, who helps them set up a plan for all the students, who helps to oversee their individual academic plans, who helps monitor their progress. There's someone always in contact with them that knows the process and guides them through the process, and then they can be on their own to follow through. But I would recommend having someone at least check in once a week with the teacher and make sure where they're at, look at their lesson plans. I mean, that would be best practices. Again, it's not always what a district sets up, but if OCR were to come and investigate, that might lead to problems. That makes sense. I hope that answered your question sufficiently.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? We are working on a frequently asked question document that will be attached to the webpage as well, that answers a lot of the questions I get on a daily basis. So you can look for that. I'm not sure if he's posted it yet. I sent it to him a couple of weeks ago and haven't seen it yet. So we'll keep looking for that. But it answers a lot of the questions we get on a daily basis.
I have a quick question about opting out.
Yes, ma'am.
So I have some students who've opted out, and then I will send their access scores and have that conversation with parents. Do they need to sign a denial of services sheet every year, or can I keep the initial one on file? I usually have them sign it every year, but I know there's another teacher in our district that just uses just the original one from the first time they signed off.
It would probably be best practice to have them sign a new one every year. I know teachers, like you said, they keep the old one and they add a line to it and just have the parents sign that one again or initial it again, just to try to say that they still wish that to happen. A lot of times it just takes showing the parents and having that discussion with them that, you know, your child really would benefit from these services. And so you need to make the contact with them each year. But as long as you're documenting, I think you're good.
Thank you.
Anything else? Now, I'm going to put my email in here. If you think of something and you want to ask me on your own, that's fine. I always try to answer within a day or two, but there's my email address, and you're welcome to email me.
Tammy, I did think of one. Sorry, as soon as
Sure.
you
Go ahead.
Is DESE going to be offering a group training for administering screeners that new teachers could attend, or is that still self-guided on the WIDA website?
It's brand new through the WIDA website, and WIDA has kind of changed their stance on how they want training done. They don't like for us to do our own trainings. They want you to go through theirs so it's consistent and follows their guidance. So they prefer that you do their online, but any of our male specialists can help walk you through the process if you contact them, or you can contact me and I'll help walk you through the process if you have specific questions that don't get addressed.
Okay, sure, thank you. I just remember that was handy to be able to say, one training, here's a bunch of people that can go to it all at the same time.
And in our district, we did that training module on the WIDA website together. Okay. As a group. So you're welcome to do that. And I don't know if you've looked at it recently, they're moving everything to that Canvas platform so you can do all of the training there. And it's much more user friendly than it used to be. It's been refined and developed where it works much better for teachers. The old one was horrible. I didn't say that, but it was horrible.
There was a lot of downloading different
yes.
things. So yeah, okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. I will tell you, if you do it together and you take the assessment together, each person gets a different order of the questions. So you can't answer the questions together because people will be getting them wrong. You have to pay attention to what they say. So what we usually did is one person took it and got all the answers, and then we talked about them together, and then the others took it and they knew the questions and the possible answers. Sure. So there's a tip for you.
Great, thank you.
Uh-huh. Any other questions? There is still your test coordinator for your district will get a report or has access to everyone who's completed their training. So you want to make sure and go back and do your training, because they do get a record of who's taking the assessments or not. And everyone who works with kindergarten students needs to complete that new WIDA screener for kindergarten if you haven't done that. And it's good to go back and redo all of them every year, just as a refresher. Anything else? We're a little bit over, but I'm not going anywhere, so we're good if you have questions. All right, well, I hope I see all of you tomorrow. I will record again tomorrow tomorrow we're going to talk about some of the fun stuff, things you can do with students to get them engaged, and kind of some strategies and supports and things like that that you can use in the classroom. So it's a little more engaging than listening to all the rules. All right. If there are no more questions, again, feel free to email me if you'd like. And I hope to see you tomorrow. Good night, everybody.